Tenders. We finished up last week after talking about offers, and so we've got to this question now of auctions and tenders and asking ourselves whether there are any special rules, and as the slide says, not really at all. So the key case here is AGC advances and McWhirter. So in a real estate auction, it can be a little bit tricky to see who is the offeror and whether or not somebody is making an invitation to treat. So think about an auction. Has anybody bought a property in an auction? Yeah? It's quite a disconcerting thing, isn't it? Has anybody sold a property in an auction? Yes, it's one of the most stressful things I've ever had to do. So think about what happens at an auction. Who is the person who's doing the negotiating at an auction? Is it, if you can call it that? The auctioneer. The auctioneer is standing in the crowd in front of the house somewhere, let's say, and essentially looking for bids. So who does the auctioneer work for? The vendor, the seller of the property. So they're usually either the agent, so they're an agent that's been appointed by the vendor to help them find somebody to sell their property, or there might be a staff member of the agent, it might be the actual agent, or it might be an auctioneer that's been brought in for that special purpose. So one of the first things the auctioneer does is starts looking, firstly let's talk about this. What's a reserve? This slide talks about what about if there's no reserve. So before we talk about no reserve, let's talk about reserve. So what is a reserve?
The minimum price that accepted.
So it's basically the minimum amount that the vendor has told the agent that they'll accept. So it's essentially part of the agent's instructions. You've got authority to go and collect bids over this amount, or to settle an agreement over this amount. So what are the bids then? I'm the auctioneer, I'm here, beautiful day, here we are at whatever this number is, Russell Street, lovely in here, this heritage, beautifully restored building, room enough here for 16 children, a large cat and a table tennis table. What am I looking for? Can I get some bids, please? I'm the auctioneer, I'm looking for some bids. Chef, what would you offer me for this wonderful building here?
To start the bidding off, I'll give you probably 300,000.
300,000, so what's he done?
Invitation.
He's made an offer. My banter at the beginning, that's my invitation to treat. I am acting for the vendor. I am inviting people to treat with me. Treat in that old-fashioned sense of make me an offer. So, Chef has made me an offer.
400.
Okay?
Gee, big better. 100,000.
Ben? So Ben has basically made another offer. Okay? Is that a counter offer?
What's his first?
No, exactly. Trick question. It's another offer. I'm the auctioneer. I'm not the owner of this building. I'm the auctioneer. Can I accept either of those offers?
No, you need to go talk with the owner.
I need to go and talk with the owner because I'm acting as the agent, unless, let's say the reserve for this building was 299,000. Could I accept then? I probably wouldn't. I would probably go through the drama because going back inside and getting instructions. Then I would come out and I might say, okay, it's on the market. It's the language that tends to be used. What does that mean?
450,000.
Now is the time that I need to tell you I am not a licensed auctioneer and I do not actually have authority from the owners of this building to sell it. Essentially, the auctioneer is putting together the invitation to treat. Offers are made by those people who are bidding in accordance with the rules of the auction. They can be accepted either by the vendor or by the agent on the vendor's behalf. So acting as agent for the vendor, again depending on the rules. If there's no reserve just means that the property is on the market from the very beginning. So it's exactly the same as Boots Catch Chemist, really. It's just in a slightly different scenario.
Do all bidders have to pre-register if they're going to bid?
Now, I'm just talking about the common law position here. So basically all of these things have now been overridden by legislation. So now there is legislation in Victoria that, and I must admit I haven't bought or sold a house for a reasonable amount of time, so I'm not all that close to it. But in order to be an auctioneer or a real estate agent, you need to be registered. You need to be registered as such, which means you have to have done a course and paid your insurance fees. There are now rules about dummy bidding. Back in the day, the first house that I sold, the auctioneer was taking rival bids from two of my mates for the first half hour before somebody, a real person, put a bid in, and that was actually totally legal back at the time, but that's how it was done. They used to get them out of trees at one stage in the 80s. I think you needed actual people at that stage, but anyway. Nowadays you can only take bids from actual people who are not related to the vendor. I think they do need to pre-register in some way, but I'm not on top of how the legislative overlay works. But when we're talking about the actual common law, this is what we can do. So the advertisement of an auction is merely a declaration of an intention to hold the sale. So it's not a binding offer. And think about it, it doesn't make any sense. But in some cases, it might be a promise to sell to the highest bidder. So we'll talk about that in the context of tenders in just a moment. So it's at the point that the hammer falls and the auctioneer, as the agent of the vendor, accepts with instructions a price over the bid, that the contract itself is formed. What if there's no reserve? Basically the situation is exactly the same. Property is just on the market that little piece earlier. Every bid is no more than an offer, which is not binding until it's assented to or agreed to, accepted. The auctioneer, who's the agent of the vendor, basically drops the hammer as a sign of the acceptance. So that is the equivalent of the demonstration of an intention to be legally bound. And there's no reason to distinguish between the two. So an auction is an invitation to treat. Let me just keep going here. Tenders. Does everybody know what a tender is? These guys are shaking their head, nodding their heads, not over here. Somebody over here want to explain? Michael, do you want to explain what a tender is?
So a number of different people put in a tender. Okay. Different offers to one individual.
So the tender itself, though, what's other than a boat? That's another word for boat. I don't know why I said that. So a tender. Sorry, I'm going to be rushing this now because I've just realised how little time we've got. We've got an hour to get through quite a lot, so I'm going to. So a tender is basically it's like an auction, but it's a silent auction in a sense. So what often government authorities will do it, but it could be anybody wants to buy something. It's usually by a purchaser. Says, I am looking for people to do X. Build my building, build my road, build my bridge, supply me with staff, whatever. Tenders are due at such and such a time. It might come with a tender pack, particularly, build my power station, this is what the plans are, this is what it's going to look like. Tenders need to be submitted by a particular time on a particular date, and then all of the tenders will be reviewed, and the purchaser will then start negotiating with, or just accept, depending on how the rules of the game are played, either a small number of offerors or people who are making the tender, or it might just go straight into contract with one of the tendering parties. So the tenders themselves are like bids to sell something. So it's sort of the opposite of an auction in that sense. And often they're done that way because they're more complex than just price. So there'll be lots of different variables that they need to weigh up, because they'll need to say how long it's going to take them, whether they're going to use union labour or not, what kind of safety standards they'll apply, range of different things. I think the case Harvela illustrates this kind of principle quite well. So it actually shows circumstances where a contract itself might be formed under a tender process. So basically in this case, I can't remember off the top of my head what they were tendering for actually. There was a statement that was made that if any offer made by you is the highest offer received, we bind ourselves to accept, provided it complies with the terms of our telex. So in other words, if you make the highest price offer, we'll accept it. In this particular case, it's obviously tended to buy something as opposed to sell, so I've given you a bum steer example the first time around, but mostly tenders are to sell something. So basically, in that case, Harvela said, well, we basically offer, I think it was $10,000 more than your highest other bidder. Royal Trust said, actually, we don't think you can pay. It was part of their problem, but that's not fair. All these other people have done this work to come in with a quote. You've come in and just said 100 or whatever it is extra. But the court said, well, actually, the terms of the process stipulated that the only thing that was relevant was highest price. So that was the only thing that you were going to take into account. So if somebody has in fact offered you the highest price, then you in fact need to take that. Because you've made a promise to accept the highest bid, and when you unpick, there is also consideration for that promise. So what are the key points here? Should be pretty straightforward. Auctioneers don't make offers to sell, instead they invite offers. The buyer's bid is an offer that can be accepted or rejected. In an auction without reserve, it's no different. And a call for tenders itself is not an offer. It's just the same as an invitation to treat or the auctioneer's call for bids. But if it has conditions attached to it, that might be a different story. So similarly, as I said before, in fact, if you had stipulated the rules for your auction such, it might be that you could be bound. So in each case, we look at absolutely what the facts are. So the general rule is auctions, tenders, they're invitations to treat. But if, like in Harvela, you narrow the rules such that it can turn itself into an offer, and it looks like an offer, it smells like an offer. If it's capable of acceptance on its terms without variation, then it's an offer, it can be accepted, and a contract can be formed.
Sorry, Catherine.
Yeah.
So once, if it is a tender and the offers come in and then I start negotiating with people that have sent in the tenders, what stage of the contracting process is that? Like, is there any obligation on my part because I've started negotiations?
So usually what will happen, that first part is that if you're not tendering to create a contract directly, and it's more usual to tender to be shortlisted or to be the only party that they negotiate with, then essentially it sets up, the contract becomes the set of rules for that negotiation at that point in time. So it might be, what your right is for them to exclusively negotiate with you on those broad terms, so you won't be allowed to go outside the terms in relation to price or delivery time or standards or whatever it happens to be. Whatever you've actually agreed, it'd be just the minor details, like your start date or something like that. And you'll have the right to be the exclusive negotiator or one of the shortlisted candidates at that stage. It's quite usual in really complex negotiations or complex infrastructure projects to not reveal all of the facts about the project until you've got your shortlisted candidates. So then they need to go and confirm their prices because it's such sensitive information that they don't want to get out. They also need to be able to confirm with bankers, and otherwise you've often got lots of moving pieces.
Just a quick query. So in a situation where you get two offers in an auction and say the vendors, it's not all just about the price. Obviously they want a high price, but at the same time they
Well, that was AGC and
not
advances.
to sell to someone.
Yeah, so in AGC advances, you'll remember that essentially somebody made a bid, somebody made a higher bid. The higher bid was rejected; it was passed in, and the vendors then went on to negotiate with the underbidder. And the higher bidder said, well, actually that's not fair. I was the highest bidder, you should have been either sold it to me or negotiate with me. Now they had doubts as to the ability of that party to pay. And so that's really how that pans out. At the end of the day, if no contract's made, no contract's made. Now the rules of engagement under the legislation require dealing with the higher bidder. But as a matter of contract law, if you don't sell it, you don't make a contract, you can do whatever you like. It belongs to you, you can negotiate with whoever you like. And that's what AGLC advances was about.
Yep.